Welcome to Planet Poetry. My name is Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton. And here we are back for our fourth season.
Four seasons.
I can't believe it. And we've got a corker of an interview today with Ian McMillan. Do you feel 4 years older than when we started, Peter?
Yes.
I feel about 10 years older, but anyway.
So, Robin, it's good to see you on our little screens. What on earth have you been doing over the last couple of months?
Oh, the usual. Lots of reading and not reading and gardening and wondering when the weather is going to pick up. A lovely trip to Wales.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, mainly introspective brooding.
Same old.
Well, I've been looking deep into my own and humanity's past.
Oh, gosh, a sort of who do you think you are type thing.
Yeah, but with Neanderthals.
I think it'd be good to hear more about that later on. But everybody is gagging for this interview, I think, because it is with Ian McMillan, poetry radio broadcast royalty. So let's hear what he had to say to Peter.
Ian McMillan is a writer and broadcaster who presents The Verb on BBC Radio 3 every Friday night. He's written poems, plays, a verse autobiography, Taking Myself Home, and a voyage around Yorkshire in Neither Knout Nor Summit. His new book with Bloomsbury is My Sand Life, My Pebble Life, a memoir of a childhood and the sea. Ian's most recent collection is To Fold the Evening Star, new and selected poems published by Carcanet in 2016, and it's from this book and the Smith doorstop pamphlet, Yes, But What Is This? What Exactly? Published in 2020, that we'll be drawing on today. So, welcome to Planet Poetry, Ian McMillan.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to sit and talk about poems. What other delights could there ever be?
It seems to me you've been a lifelong promoter and encourager of writing. I first saw you when you were performing with the Circus of Poets.
Wow, gosh.
I remember even then that I thought, God, these guys seem really professional and kind of on it and focused and good and entertaining too.
Where was that? Where was it?
It may have been Putney. It was definitely in London somewhere.
Putney, yes, we did a gig in Putney.
And you've always seemed to be at the heart of things, like the T.S. Eliot Awards. I remember I was there and you called it the Poets AGM. Even on your X feed, you've got this kind of infectious excitement. Where did that all start? What ignited this love of words?
3 things. The first thing was that my dad was an endless teller of stories. Sometimes the same story over and over again.
Yeah.
But he just made me think that actually words are so exciting. Words can be used for anything. Words can be used to manipulate. Words can be used for delight. So my dad was the one. His auntie, Aunt Bella Houghton, was a poet, a Victorian rhyming balladeer.
Oh, wow.
So if rhyme ever appears through your DNA, then it came through Aunt Bella. My mum and dad met as pen pals in the Second World War. He was from Scotland, she was from Barnsley. So they met through the written word. So that, another reason writing is important for me. But the main reason, I think, is that I was lucky enough to be born in the West Riding of Yorkshire in the 1950s, which was the most wonderful education authority, run by a godlike genius called Sir Alec Clegg, who said all children are creative. So in our ordinary school, that's about half a mile from where I'm sitting now, we did stories, we did singing, we did dancing, we did art, we did drama, and it was just part of everyday life. And everybody was encouraged. And I've always thought, we can all do this. That was the kind of hidden subtext of that school. Everybody can do this. Everybody can be a writer. Everybody can be a performer. You've got the tools with you because the tools are language. And most of us can speak to a greater or lesser extent. And so, yes, I've always been an encourager of other people, whether as writers or performers. The trouble is, if you encourage people to write, they end up writing, they end up sending them you, they end up, what do you do? I'm so fascinated by this kind of slipstream, that people will send me books all the time. People will stop me on the street and tell me a poem. People will stick poems through my letterbox. And you think, well, I have to give that as much time as the next book I'm reading for The Verb. So what it ends up is that I'm endlessly reading, which is all good, but it just means you wish there was more time in the day. to write and read.
You know, people like you that are so front and centre in encouraging that engagement with writing. You know, your own writing is almost overshadowed by all the other work you do. And I was so delighted that you agreed to talk to us, was this idea of actually putting the boot on the other foot, as it were, and actually really focusing on the amazing work that's behind you as this public persona.
I'm lucky enough to do 3 regular columns for newspapers and magazines. That makes you write. Yeah. And also I take on quite interesting projects. So I've just been translating The Barber of Seville into Yorkshire dialect, which has been a big project. And that just made me think really hard. But yeah, it squeezes your own writing. There's no doubt about that. That's a fact.
Cheekily, as ever on this show, we ask people to read poems that we choose.
Good idea, good idea.
The first one I'd like you to read is called The Force of His Storm Knocked Me From My Stool, which is from To Fold the Evening Star, which is your new and selected poems. Beautiful title.
It just came from the idea of, there used to be that paper around here called The Star. Yeah. People called it the Evening Star. And I just had this idea of folding the paper when you bought it, so it became the folded Evening Star. This poem, it's over 30 years old, so it was written by a young fella. It came out in a book that was first published in 1994. And it's about playing with language, which is what I always do. It's just playing all the time with language. So, and it's also about the fact that I like poems when things happen that I wasn't expecting and didn't redraft it. I just had this idea and I wrote it down. This is the thing we encourage people not to do, but I'm sure I did this. It's an improvisation, I think. So it's called The Force of His Storm Knocked Me From My Stool, which is just one of those lines that just pops into your head. And you think, oh, what a great line.
It's almost like a Dylan Thomas thing, isn't it?
Do you know, I hadn't thought of that before, but you're right. And it's like the force that through the green fuse drives the flower, isn't it? Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. And as a young man, I was obsessed with Dylan Thomas, so that's where this came from, I'm sure. It goes like this. The force of his storm knocked me from my stool. Please, for this poem, assume that the word tired equals the word fat. I went to see the doctor about feeling tired all the time, waking up tired, falling asleep, holding a child's Barbie horse, snoring through a guitar being painted. The doctor advises me to squat on water. Feel it soak into your kecks, he says. But I don't wear kecks, I wear skirts and tops. On fine days, I wear skirts and tops and butt and no hat. Sometimes in a poem, you have to put words in to make rhythm. Sometimes you put silly words to make rhyme, like that word, water. At home, the doctor moans. He says, I feel so tired all the time. His wife says, eat less, you tired slobber. For slobber, read doctor, if you would. At home, I squat in a wet dish. The water soaks into my skirt. I'm still tired. Hi, my name is Tony. Did you know the inhabitants of my head have 52 different words for the word you know as tired? I hate it when Tony comes into a poem. I have a capacity for hate. Hi, Tony. Come and sit here by the fire. I've been read that out for the first time in many years. I remember it was about kind of feeling knackered when you got kids. You know, I've got 3 kids who are all grown up now, but you're feeling knackered. And then it was also about just words that I like kecks. Kecks for trousers round here, but in the northeast it's the word for your underpants. Yeah. And then just the things that you end up having in your house. So when you got the kids, my girls had Barbie dolls and Barbie had a horse. So we had this Barbie horse, and the Barbie horse was always knocking about. And then the guitar being painted is a specific memory of, I still work for a community arts group in Doncaster called DARTS, Doncaster Community Arts. And we had this evening where a guy was playing the blues guitar and an artist called Usha was painting his guitar because he was doing the blues. She painted his guitar blue, then she painted him blue, then she painted the audience blue. And it was just the most wonderful, glorious, joyous event.
How slippery the language is. You know, you're telling us that one word means another. And it's almost like you're struggling for control of the poem, you know, with Tony. Yeah. I love this Tony that just turns up and he's like an expert on tiredness.
I like doing that kind of thing when people turn up. And there's certain names that are quite funny. Yeah. You know, people always say that Keith is a funny name, which it is, but Tony, when you look for hidden words in things, it's got the word tone in it. It's got the word tone poem. People called Tony are often called Tone, which is great. And then Tony just appears. But then at the end, I said that last line with a kind of menace because I remember when I wrote it, I thought, sit by the fire, Tony. We're going to set fire to you, man. You know, poor old Tony, burning Tony.
Oh, poor old Tony. Because I had this idea that he just kind of sits down by the fire and makes himself comfortable. And
he does until we set fire to him. Yeah, Tony, just sit here by the fire. You know, he's going to be burning. Tony's on fire. Perhaps it's because it's from that collection called Dad the Donkey's on Fire. You know, I often think about individual words, either what they mean or what they sound like.
When you say a word over and over and it becomes more and more absurd.
And you wonder why that is. Why is that? You know, the umbrella. Yeah. It loses its meaning. It becomes musical. It becomes something else. It is a fascinating thing, that, isn't it? That is about the way that we connect words to what they actually are. Yeah, I love doing it. I do it a lot. And you do it in writing workshops, you know, and it gets them going. They think harder about the word, the single word.
I think of this in a slightly similar vein, the poem Essential Engineering Works.
Oh, yeah. Well, Essential Engineering Works, I remember vividly, I was booked to do a reading and a workshop in gallery in Bilth Wells, and my mate Bob Mole was going to meet me off the train at Newport Station, and the train was tragically and utterly delayed. You know, so I think I more or less made the gig, but I was late, and I hate being late. I'm always stupidly early, so I thought, well, I'll write a poem while I'm on the train, sat there.
Amazing.
And it's in 3-line verses because I love 3-liners. 3-liners, just a little units of thought and little boxes of language. I just imagined that while I was on the train, that I was also at the same time, through some kind of teleportation, actually in the gallery, doing the reading. So somehow by writing the poem, I had managed to make myself, in a Star Trek kind of way, appear at the gig. Essential Engineering Works, which again, what a beautiful phrase that is. I mean, you hate it when you hear it because you know you're going to be late, but Essential Engineering Works, what a great 3 words those are. The train stops somewhere in the lit Midlands. Sun reflecting, you know the kind of thing I mean, the lit Midlands. Let me tell you some things about this poem. The poem happens on a train stopped in the Midlands, and this poem also happens, if a poem can happen, in a gallery in Wales, where a man is looking at photographs. The 2 parts of this poem happen at once, quickly, like the snap of a successful Christmas cracker. I am sorry. This poem was meant to move more quickly to the gallery in Wales from the lit Midlands. It is stuck on the line somewhere between the Midlands and Wales. Listen, you can hear the poem's engine running. It will start soon. It will lurch into life. Essential Engineering Works are holding the poem still. A man is standing before a photograph and he is seeing only himself in the glass. Listen, hear the poem's engine running. Gaze at the photograph and wait. So in the poem I become myself. I'm on the train, but I'm also somebody waiting for me at the gallery and looking in the photographs and seeing himself reflected in the glass. I've also somehow become the man in the gallery. So I'm not only the person waiting for me, I am me waiting for me. And just things kept happening on the train, like when nothing happens, but your mind starts to make things attached to the poem. So the sound of the engine becomes the sound of the poem. And once you've decided that's going to happen, then the other things can start happening. You know, you can hear the poem's engine running. It will start soon. It will lurch into life, which is a kind of image of how you write a poem. Yeah. And somehow I wanted time to go very slowly in the poem because at the end, you know, gaze at the photograph and wait. So the guy in the gallery is waiting for me. I'm waiting for the poem to start. It is so interesting to read these poems again. I'm so pleased you've chosen these poems because it is like, it's like meeting the young man I was.
Finding a postcard from yourself.
It is, it definitely is. Yeah. It definitely is.
Actually, what you were saying about slipping between identities, you know, on that, you know, you're there on the train, you're there in the art gallery. There's this beautiful poem of yours called Mining Town I'd like you to read. But in there, you slip between people's consciousnesses really effortlessly, and people turn up like Tony, you know, a bit earlier on.
Yeah. Just Mr. Johnson's in this one.
Yeah.
Partly because I've always thought that I'm I'm two people at once. One is the person who likes to make people laugh, the crowd pleaser, the public person. And I can make people laugh. And, you know, when I work in community arts, I like to work with people who don't want to write poems. Every other Monday, so not today, I work in a village near Doncaster working with people with mental health issues. They're a fascinating group of people, but they wouldn't usually turn up to a poetry event.
Yeah.
And those events are wonderful. They're funny. They're a bit scary sometimes. They write songs, they write poems. And I have to be a certain kind of personality to do that, like I have to be when I'm introducing the T.S. Eliots. But there's also this other side of me that's private and quiet and likes to sit and write. And I've always been a bit of both. And the odd thing is when somebody turns up to an event expecting either the funny one, and I'm not the funny one, or expecting the serious one, I'm not the serious one. Yeah. That you can see them looking, thinking, which Ian McMillan has I come to see? Yeah, Mining Town, it's very observational, this. None of this is made up. Halfway through, I decided that I combined the idea of my dad, who used to be a boxing champion in the Navy, but I couldn't imagine my dad ever raising his voice, never mind raising his fist, and he was always saying sorry. My dad's big word was sorry. So imagine meeting these people and saying sorry. And then Mr. Johnson was the chap next door but one to us. So I've lived in the same house for 40 years, so he was 2 doors up. And it's also playing about with the idea of the face and the idea of the coal face and the pit, which was just over there, and the idea of somebody's face. And then when my son's face loses definition, that's my son, the award-winning poet, Andrew. So here he is, as a little lad in the poem. I see. And also Mining Town. I remember writing it and thinking, what I'm doing is I'm mining the word town, mining ideas. As he goes to sleep, my son's face loses definition. He becomes like the man in the moon or a child's drawing of a face. His eyes flicker. Outside, in the light of a summer evening, Mr. Johnson bends down, picks leaves up, only really is looking for his wife, who died at the start of the year. If I think hard, I can recall her face just. My daughters are talking about their visit to the Yorkshire Mining Museum. They went right to the face. It was like a child's drawing of a moonless night. And that's it, really. This place has gone down like a balloon. One of those balloons that you find behind the settee 2 weeks after Christmas, nothing more to say. I find it hard to imagine my dad as a boxing champ. He was, though, in the Navy in the 1940s. He's so gentle. I imagine him saying sorry every time he punched somebody. I never went for the face, he told me once. There's certain things in here that I've used maybe too much. That phrase, a child's drawing of something. I've used that phrase again somewhere. Yeah. You know, the idea of he looked like a child's drawing on a fridge. Bits like, in the second stanza, his eyes flicker, outside in the light of a summer evening. So putting outside next to in is kind of the young man showing off a bit again. You know, it's influenced by, at the time I was reading a lot of Frank O'Hara and the New York poems, and the kind of I did this, I did that idea. So you end up writing down the things that happened that day by use of the white space of the line ending and the stanza break. You try and make them a bit more profound is the wrong word, but that kind of thing. Again, an old poem that it's so nice to read it. And it's interesting when you write about real people like your kids. Yeah. They're all grown up, you know. The young people in the poem, they're kind of fixed there, aren't they? Because there they are, these kids. And now they're grown up. Fascinating. And you're right, I can be several different personas in there. And again, Mr. Johnson pops in, Tony. Maybe it's a trope, you know, people just popping into the poem.
Weirdly, when I was reading this, I had Virginia Woolf came into my mind. And there's things that she does where it's almost like there's a camera moving through a room, just glancing at everybody and moving out into the outside world and maybe looking at a lighthouse or something. But this thing of you and the boy, and then they're looking out at Mr. Johnson bending down outside. And there's that kind of linking of consciousnesses, like joining the dots and making a bigger picture that's not quite about you and not quite about them, but it's almost about the town.
You're right about the camera. So it is like that. It's often like that with me when I'm writing, that you are moving around a space. I think because I've always had a sort of distrust, if you like, of the well-written poem that takes you in a certain direction and ends up at the place that you thought it might.
Yeah.
Which is why one of the reasons I introduced it at the end of here, nothing more to say. Then I start telling you something, by the way, so it's that. So endings are so interesting, aren't they? And sometimes you can spot the ending coming a mile away.
Yeah.
And sometimes the endings are kind of da-da, or it's a kind of boom, or a kind of dying cadence fall away, So I've always tried to move away from that. Although I'm guilty of it here by putting the last stanza just having two lines and having that kind of half rhyme with face and once, so the cadence is going down again. Gosh, I could rewrite all these, but I won't.
No,
but it's so wonderful to read them again. I can tell you.
Yeah, I love them as they are, and it's.
Good, thanks.
I guess I want to talk briefly about Barnsley because I understand you've been awarded the Freedom of Barnsley.
Barnsley, yes, I have.
Which made me think of you being sort of corralled in corners and people pointing chairs at you, and suddenly you were released into the wild again or something.
It's a bit like that.
But there are poems in your collection where you're in Mexico and you're thinking of Barnsley. It's like where do you end and Barnsley begin?
I always quote the great Roy Fisher, my favourite poet, when he said, "Birmingham's what I think with," and I think Barnsley's what I think with.
Yeah.
More specifically, Darfield, where I live, which is 4 miles outside Barnsley. Barnsley was always the town, but Barnsley is the place I've always lived. So I've been here 67 years. So your question is so astute, because where does it end and where do I begin? I don't think we do. I don't think we end, because it's been a fascinating place to be for the last 67 years. Here's a place that was an agricultural place in the 18th century. In the 19th century, when they found the pits, suddenly it becomes a boom town, sinking pits everywhere. When I was at school, my dad worked in an office, so there was only me and Mr. Rothin, the school caretaker's daughter, that didn't work. Those dads didn't work down the pit. This was a total pit town. Then in the 80s, after the strike, it got wrecked. It didn't know what to do. It didn't know how to reinvent itself. It's doing all right at the moment, interestingly. Culturally, we're doing well. We have a very good council who understand the power of art. We've kept libraries open, we've got galleries, we've got museums. And it just feels it is what I think with, as Roy Fisher says. And the Freedom of Barnsley was a great thing. I got a letter from the mayor, which I daren't open. So my wife opened it. They said, they've offered you the Freedom of Barnsley. So I rang up and I said, does that mean I can march my sheep up Market Hill? They went, no. I said, well, all right. Is there a ceremony where I get a big daft key? And they went, no. So I went, can I go and watch the mighty Barnsley FC for nothing? They said, no. A lot of people think I get my season ticket free anyway, but I don't. I said, can I go into any shop in Barnsley and demand goods free? They went, no. I said, what do I get? They said, you get a certificate. And I must have sounded disappointed. But they said, it's framed. I went, oh, great.
Well, it's nice to be told you're free. You're
free. I've as yet had no benefits, but I'm sure they'll accrue one day.
Well, can we hear the poem My Dog?
My Dog, yeah. This was commissioned by the Radio 4 programme Front Row when it first started. It was starting in April, and they said, we'd like you to write a poem that begins with the T.S. Eliot line, April is the cruelest month. So I faxed it. That's how long ago it was. And they rang up and said, only the first page of the fax appears to have come through. And I went, that's the entire poem. That's the gag. I wrote the line down, April is the cruelest month. And I just thought, what a great name for a dog. What a great name for a dog.
Like you do. Yeah.
I'm allergic to dogs. They make me cough and sneeze. So I thought, any chance to ridicule dogs is great. So this is it. My Dog. April is the cruelest month. Might seem like a strange name for a dog. And sometimes I think it is when I'm shouting her name on the high moors in the driving wind. April is the cruelest month, I shout. April is the cruelest month. And my dog runs up to me, barking, wagging her tail. And I feel slightly, ever so slightly, embarrassed. But then, when people say, as they walk by me, on the high moors in the driving wind, can a month back, can April wag its tail, I swell with pride, because my dog's name is image and metaphor and poetry. So, April is the cruelest month, I shout, and April is the cruelest month, and the words roll round my mouth like Easter eggs in a shopping basket, which is the name of my cat. Hey, I love a good gag, but and it's also about the idea that, that a line like that we all know, we can then play with, somehow it's like, and also I knew that it was going to be on the radio, and I knew that I was going to read it on the radio, so I knew that it had to have a kind of impact. So you had to, that on the radio people are going to be cooking their tea, or they're going to be in the car or whatever. So I knew you could only hear it once. So I knew it had to have a kind of gag at the end and an impact. So yes, I do. I sometimes read that poem out, and I do like it. And then at the end, you get either tumbleweed or I don't know. And it's one of those where the ending just occurred to me halfway down the poem. I thought, how am I going to end this poem? Oh yeah,
that's great.
Easter eggs in a shopping basket.
Humour's got to, in a poem's got to be more than a punchline. If you want people to come back to it. But there's something about the way that you write humour that it doesn't put you off. You don't think, oh, I've got that punchline, nothing else to see here. There's much more to it. And it's a trick, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's a trick that's to do with partly being unthreatening. So sometimes people feel threatened by funny stuff because they think, if I'm not clever, I'm not going to get it. And somehow the funny person is going to be taking the mickey out of me. And the other thing I try and do is just include everything in it. So after a bit, everything becomes funny. So you see, they're just funny. That my morning stroll tweets.
Yeah.
I set off.
They're great.
I get up ridiculously early. I love getting up early. And I go for my walk at about 5:20, and I walk around the village I live in, and I get back at about 6:10. It's always the same walk. And I try to train myself to see different things, and sometimes they're funny. Quite often are funny, but they're kind of a whole. And it's partly just a way to get me going first thing in the morning, so I do my walk and I do exercises. And this is a kind of mental exercise to get me thinking, just to think I must see something. I've got to see something. And it's a memory exercise because I try and remember them.
Yeah.
And that's the comedy, that everything is funny. Absolutely everything is funny.
The humour in your writing isn't that gag-based thing. It's just you kind of lift up the horizon by a couple of degrees and everything looks slightly different. We
can all do it. It's not difficult. I think everybody can have a go at that just by trusting. You trust the things that you see. The other day I saw a fella, I tweeted about it. I think he'd had a couple of pints, and it was 5:20 in the morning, and he was just squatting by a wall, like old miners used to squat. And he was talking to his phone really close, and he was going, damn the thing. And you couldn't hear him, but you could hear the rhythm. And it felt like he was trying to explain something. And he sort of ignored me, even though I went, morning, because, and it was almost like he'd grown out the wall, or he was part of the wall, and he was talking on the phone. It was just funny. I don't know. I think maybe you're right about the gags, that in the end, gag is something, but funny is something else, I suppose.
Can we read Happiness on the first train from Barnsley to Huddersfield, talking about early mornings?
Again, this is just a happy poem. I'm generally a happy kind of fella. I love early trains. The early trains are just the best. And the first train from Barnsley to Huddersfield goes at 06:05. It goes through all these fantastic stations. And I remember being on the first train and just, as it says in the poem, happiness creeping over me. And just thinking, wow, this is great. Just been on this train. It's called Happiness on the first train from Barnsley to Huddersfield. The happiness creeps up on you in the dark train as we stop at Dodworth, then Silkstone Common, then Penistone. And some people are sleeping, and sleeping is a sort of happiness. And those three men who are always on this train are talking, and talking is a form of happiness. And I'm looking. And looking is a kind of happiness. Then the train pulls out of Penistone Station across that impossibly beautiful viaduct that I can never remember the name of, and the light is arriving in the sky as if by slow train. And now I can remember the name of the viaduct, and the name of the viaduct is Happiness. Happiness high across the slowly lightening fields. I remember specifically, it gradually got light as we went across Penistone Viaduct, and these three fellas were talking, and they were taking no notice of the viaduct, because they did it every day.
It's almost like a sort of mystical revelation. Can we move you on to An Archaeologist Finds an Umbrella?
This is a more recent poem, and I thought, what if an archaeologist found an umbrella at a dig? Would they assume it was like a prehistoric umbrella? Or would they know what to do with the umbrella? It's partly that the word umbrella is funny. An archaeologist finds an umbrella. Not a particularly old one, at the dig's edge, left from a night out, blown outside in and chucked on the floor like a flower clipped from a bunch. The archaeologist made a thing of opening it, stood there, half a brolly, above her head like a fossil. And it wasn't even raining. Now, try and guess what this says about the past. I do write a lot about time. The archaeologist is in several different times at once. So they're in the time when they're actually holding the umbrella up. They're in the time when the umbrella was dropped after a night out, maybe the night before. But they're also in this ancient time because it's by a dig. So the archaeologist is existing in 3 different times at once. And the idea of that line, the archaeologist made a thing of opening it. I remember when I wrote that, I was thinking about opening the past.
I think it's such a brilliant metaphor for the weirdness of time, the strangeness of this object, that's so everyday. And it's doing that thing of slipping between times and slipping between identities that you do so deftly.
Time is a thing that obsesses me.
Yeah.
More so as I get older. I'm 67 now, and you start thinking about time.
Do you stray into nostalgia?
Oh, yeah, I love nostalgia. Gosh, I'm a big nostalgia man. The last book I wrote was a book of memories about the coast called My Sand Life, My Pebble Life, a kind of memoir. And what happened was they asked me to write this memoir, Bloomsbury. And I said, well, I'm not very good at writing long things. I can write short things. I said, how many words do you want? They went 50,000. I went, can I write instead 50 1,000-word bits about the coast? And they said yes. And the idea was that if I did a gig, I'd stay over and go to the nearest bit of coast and write about it. And then the pandemic happened, so I couldn't go anywhere. So I said, well, can I write 50 memories of the coast? And that was such a joyful thing to do. I'd come up in the pandemic, it's the only good thing about it, come to this room, dredge another memory out about the coast, write it down, try and make it lyrical, try and make it funny. So in the end, so much of what I write is about the past and about memory. Memory is a big part of what I write. And sentimental, I am the most sentimental man. Like my dad was really sentimental. He would always cry when he was an older man in his 80s and he'd had a stroke and he was sat watching the telly. He'd cry at the theme tune of Neighbours. He thought the theme tune of Neighbours was kind of profoundly, deeply sad. And I know nostalgia can be a terrible liar, as Mark Davenant, the photographer, says. Nostalgia is a liar. There's no point looking back to a golden age because there wasn't one. But images from the past pop up for me all the time. I think it's partly because I've always lived here, so I'm familiar with this street and I'm familiar with the bottom of the street and I'm familiar with the top of the street. And so things that happened pop in. But the past is a big part. Because I've got such a lot of past,
Can I ask you to read the title poem of your recent Smith Doorstop pamphlet?
I've done a few pamphlets for Smith Doorstop. I love pamphlets as a form. A book is a thing, a book is a book. But a pamphlet, they can be like messages from the front, they can tell you what's happening. I've always liked the idea of writing sequences. And so this is just a sequence that I wrote just about, it's about time, actually. It's about time. And the title, yes, but what is this? What exactly? Again, another line that came to me. I thought, I'll have that.
Seemed to me to be so modern, that title. I thought, God,
that's
so hip.
It is modern. It is hip. God, it's hip. It's so hip. Yes, but what is this? What exactly? 1. I snap my fingers at time like it's a waiter approaching with soup. 2. Rootling down the back of the drawer, I found these diaries from years that haven't happened yet. Rootling round the back of the diaries, I found these drawings from evenings that haven't slipped by yet. Rootling around at the back of these years, I found diaries that haven't been opened yet. Rootling around at the back of these evenings, I found openings that haven't yet closed. 3. This bit of the day was improvised, but this bit of the day wasn't improvised. This bit of the day was completely improvised, but this bit of the day was only partly improvised. This bit of the day was improvised, but badly. This bit of the day was improvised, but well. This bit of the day was going to be improvised. This bit of the day wasn't going to be improvised. 4. Hello, time. Tell you what, you are like the fossil of a clown's last laugh. 5. I think we'll start with a starter. Yes, we'll have is distracted by the view of a bridge from the cafe window. That thing there, that thing, is distracted by the gulls flying over the bridge it can see from the cafe window. That, I believe, is distracted by a memory of a rough trip to Lundy. It's called soup. Please forgive me if I snap my fingers at you. I like jazz. 6. I find that if I boil my egg for 5 years, then I really can't dip my soldiers in. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, because I've been alive for so long that I can't tell the difference anymore. 7. Time passes. It passes. It passes. It scores. 8. Dawn breaks with an audible click, and an owl waits in a bus shelter for the first bus home. A man walks a dog past me as I walk through the morning's paper hoop. Time, eh? Time. See, that's my obsession with time.
Yeah.
My complete obsession with time.
It does go through your work.
It does, and it always has. And there's so much stuff in there to think about, like section 5, where me and my wife are just sat in a cafe and we go and have a starter. And I said that line, we'll start with a starter, which is a daft thing to say. And then you're looking out, you're going, look at that, we'll have... And she's going, look, just stop looking out the window and decide what you're going to have. And then time passes, it passes, it scores. It was just a gag that came to me. And then I've just been reading a Spanish poet called Jordi, H-O-R-D-I, Jordi Doce, D-O-C-E. And he, translated, writes about time a lot, and some just single lines about time. So a lot of poets are interested in time. That one about boiling the egg for 5 years, that just came to me.
Yeah.
Again, I was sitting there boiling an egg for my grandson, and he has it for 4 minutes. Like, what if you boil it for 5 years? What would happen? And then you kind of, time slips by, so you think in 2 minutes, 5 years will have gone by, won't they? Yeah. Time is definitely speeding up, You think about the pandemic, it was either 10 minutes ago or 20 years ago, and time just whizzes past. And there's 2 snapping of fingers in there, because I once had a guest on the Verb, who I won't tell you who it was, but they were trying to trap my attention by snapping the fingers. And I thought, I'm not a wine waiter, just say something. Don't snap your fingers at me. So I've always found snapping your fingers kind of aggressive.
Yeah. This seems to me one of those examples of you disguising, smuggling in really serious things under a cloak of fun. That fascinates me about your work, is that a skimmed read, you think, oh, this is it's lovely and it makes me smile, and you dwell with it for a while, and actually you're taking on such serious concerns at the same time.
Yeah, that's what I try to do. I try to make both things happen at once. And thanks for noticing that, because, you do have to read it a couple of times. I mean, the first section about the waiter approaching with soup, what I wanted to put in was, and it ended up being too much of a gag, was that me and my wife were at the Showroom Cinema in Sheffield, our local art house cinema, and the waiter said, soup du jour. And I said, what's the soup du jour, please? And he said, I'll just go and check. And he came back and went, it's soup of the day. And I thought, that's almost too perfect, isn't it? Yeah. It's like you would think you'd made that up. And just the idea of time, like it's a waiter approaching with soup, is the idea that it's taking a while. You ordered this soup ages ago.
Yeah.
And here it comes, and the waiter is approaching with soup. And the idea of, then you think of, the primordial soup and the soup of time and that kind of thing. So yes, there's a lot of that kind of thing in it.
Could I ask you to read as a final poem from the pamphlet? Seeing a goal scored from a passing train.
There's a magazine called Pickles, which is a football magazine. And Pickles asked me if I'd write a poem. And whenever I'm on a train, I try and see a wicket taken if it's a cricket match,
Yeah.
and a goal scored if it's a football match. Very rare, very rare. I've probably only seen 2 goals scored in my life. It was somewhere on the way to Hull. So I think it might have been North Ferriby United. This poem's called Seeing a Goal Scored from a Passing Train. The train slows, almost stops. Drizzle's stories are stale and repetitious, and the traveller wipes a hole in the window steam with his sleeve. A goal is a brief moment of clarity, a punctuation mark in a game's long sentence. A match is happening on a soggily diluted field. Men and boys run through sludge to get, well, where? To the future celebration, obvs. A goal is a point of sudden change, a new route found on an old map. A bloke who looks like he's made of mud boots the ball so hard that the air, the very air it travels through, almost breaks. A goal is a memory you always knew you'd have, even before the goal was scored. The keeper flaps like a scarf in a breeze, wafts nothing except the ball's ghost, and the striker runs away, mouth open in joy. The goal is always the goal of the game and the goal of the season, until the next goal. I stand and whoop, and the train's dullards stare at me like I'm a cave painting come to life. I don't care. It's a goal. The train creaks, moves. It's almost like the same train that's in that one where I'm stuck on the Lit Midlands, isn't it? But yeah, that's the moment, isn't it? And when you're about to score, you think, I'm going to score.
Yeah.
You have the memory of the goal. You know, I still think about it now, having read the poem again. So a goal in a match can happen in so many different times at once. It really can. And it's true that I actually stood up on the train and went, yeah, get in. And people are looking at me, not like I'm drunk, but gosh, yes.
This sounds like the perfect moment to end our interview with you standing on a train and whooping with glee.
Yes, that's my life.
It's a lovely archetypical Ian McMillan moment. So, Ian, thank you so much for giving us your time for Planet Poetry.
Thank you.
It's just been amazing to have you.
Good, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Ian McMillan, he's a legend, isn't he? I mean, he's such a pro. Obviously, everybody knows his voice. I loved listening to that interview. I thought it was really terrific.
One thing I cut out was at the beginning of the interview, I said I felt really nervous talking to someone that was such an accomplished broadcaster. And he was really kind about it. He said he has a producer talking in his head, helping him. And it's actually people like us that make it up as we go along that he admires, which was very diplomatic. Very, very kind of him. I mean, he didn't have a producer for his interview with you, and it was still very, very measured and interesting. And I almost felt guilty having to edit it down a bit, just to fit our time slot, because I could have listened to him talking all the time. I had this idea in my head about an imaginary Ian McMillan before I started really drilling down and reading his books. Ah, did you? Yeah. And while his poems really make me, there's a lot to laugh at and there's such a lightness of touch. And there is a real seriousness about his concerns as well. I think you described it very well when you said that he smuggles serious things in under a cloak of fun. Yeah. I loved, for example, when he read My Dog, and it has that wonderful punchline at the end, which I didn't see coming, and it was a laugh out loud moment. But he's very self-deprecating almost about that kind of thing. Oh, well, you have to throw in a gag sometimes. And I like that way he talked very easily about his skill. Yeah, like Easter eggs in a shopping basket, which is the name of my cat. Yeah. He's so matter-of-fact about it. April is the cruelest month. I think that would be a great name for a dog, kind of. And it's just like, I would never have thought of that. No, quite. His emphasis on individual words. He's got this poem, Mining Town. How do you mine the word town? And it kind of really digging into this idea of the town and into the single word and pulling things out of it. Or talking about this bloke Tony that turns up in one of his poems, and Tony's a funny name and it's got tone in it and so on. Using a magnifying glass over a particular word and just really looking at it until it kind of becomes weird. Yeah, kind of obsessing over it, but then using that
I loved the happiness poem, Happiness on the First Train from Barnsley to Huddersfield. Yes, that's a great description. And he is famous for being on trains and buses, isn't he?
Yeah.
All his tweets.
He's one of those non-driving male poets.
Well, like someone else not a million miles from me.
Yeah, I never learned. A gentleman doesn't.
And actually the poem about seeing a goal scored from a train, that is a magical moment, isn't it? It's funny, I was in a workshop once years ago, a very grand poet saying, don't think of all the really magical, amazing things you've experienced and try and write about them. What you write will never be as amazing as the amazing thing, like, the most amazing sunset or the most amazing murmuration, just don't even try. But actually looking at the train window and seeing a goal scored is quite an amazing moment, isn't it? I love his idea of, what does he say? He stood up and they looked at him like he was a cave painting come to life.
The train's dullards, yeah.
The train's dullards. That's an excellent word, isn't it? Dullard.
There's something almost kind of Zen monk-like about it. He does the same walk every day. Yes, and he tells himself to kind of remember things that he sees. That constant attention to the minutiae of being in the same place all that time as well, but seeing different things in it all the time.
That is fascinating, isn't it?
I love that, yeah.
And a real discipline, the walk and the observation. And he said, didn't he? He tells himself to always see something new or something different. The fact that he says quite often there's something that's funny, I think that's a reflection of his personality. He says he's a happy sort of a fella. So that's just the glass half full. The same observation by another person perhaps wouldn't be seen as funny. One could just as easily see the tragedy in something.
That sense of authenticity as well. There's no airs and graces about him, and he is who he is, and actually who he is really quite an original and interesting poet who also has got this warmth and humour to him.
Yeah. Do you think he's almost a sort of successor to Roger McGough or someone like that, who was one of the first sort of popular poets, wasn't he?
John Betjeman, that kind of...
John Betjeman, and then the Liverpool poets.
Yeah.
And actually I saw Ian at Aldborough. He was performing with John Cooper Clarke.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a very interesting double act as well.
Yeah, it must have been great.
I admire the way he bridges between the popular and the performance, or the verging on, and the serious. And you pointed out at the beginning that, he's compared the T.S. Eliot Prize readings at the South Bank Centre for many years, and a more kind of serious event one can't really imagine, and yet he's always done a fantastic job of that.
Make it feel real and down to earth and approachable, and put a human face on the nerves as well, because a lot of those poets in that big auditorium must be feeling like, oh my God. And he somehow kind of makes it manageable and a bit like a sitting room or something,
I remember once doing for my blog a kind of series of little snapshot interviews with poets, and I used to ask the same question each time, and one of the questions was, you've just been told you're shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot and you're going to have to read at the South Bank. What's the first thing that you think? And someone said, new shoes. Because actually you get up on that stage and everyone's sort of below you, and it's true, you can see people's shoes very, very easily. One thing that struck me hearing Ian talk about everything he's doing, and it just strikes me that he does a huge amount. I don't know where he finds all the time in the day. He's got his structure to the day. Mind you, if he gets up at 5:00, that's pretty, I'm impressed just by that. Yeah. But he does so many things, doesn't he? He's involved in his local community, writes for the local paper, I think. He does teaching and workshops. He goes outreach. He does the radio work. He writes, and he's always this generous person. And he laughed, didn't he, about people putting poems through his front door or handing him something in the street, handing him a book. And he says, I have to find time to read it. And you think, wow, it is amazing. And he was so giving us his time so generously. I thought that was very touching.
Yeah, I think that generosity extends to actually thinking about the audience. It's like, what would somebody sitting in an audience listening to my poems want to hear? I think that's part of he factors that in, as well as, his absolute playfulness with language and his kind of, subtle moving between people and personas and all the rest of it. That, it's those technical things he does so effortlessly, you barely notice them, but
yeah.
Great fun to talk to him anyway.
Yeah, a real star.
Now then, Robin, what did you get up to in your summer holidays? I want the full essay.
The full PowerPoint. Well, funny you should ask me that. The thing that stands out for me was that we took a week away in Wales, North Wales, the first week of September, when it seemed to be hot everywhere. So although we had a carload of waterproofs and jigsaw puzzles, actually it turned out to be kind of shorts and walking and very balmy. But yes, we went to a lovely National Trust cottage on the coast of the Glynn Peninsula, which is up there in North Wales, very unspoilt and very beautiful. We didn't know anything about the place at all.
Yeah, I don't.
And it was gorgeous. But after a few days, we were doing this little walk around a town called Aberdaron, and wandering into the little church, because we like to go into churches, and there was this sort of almost like a shrine at the back of the church to R.S. Thomas.
Oh.
And he was in fact the priest there for a short while. And this little display, it was really nice. There were some of his poems there was clippings from the newspaper, there was stuff about his life, and I got really curious because he was really just a name to me, and confess I hadn't really read any R.S. Thomas. So I went away, and back at the cottage was actually a book which is called The Man Who Went into the West, and it's the life of R.S. Thomas by Byron Rogers. So I devoured that, and it got me into wanting to read more R.S. Thomas, and so a lovely coincidence.
Yeah, well, it's good to discover the poets rooted in a particular region, isn't it? I think it brings the region alive.
Well, yes, and it sort of felt, because it turned out that he and his wife retired to a cottage, just a half a mile away from where we were staying.
Yeah.
So that was quite exciting, really. The book contains quite a few of his poems, and it made me want to read more. So that's on my pile. And then other than that, yes, I've done a bit of reading, and I've got quite a few books that I've started or I've dipped into but haven't read in depth. It's just the way it is in holidays, isn't it?
The discipline goes out the window, doesn't it?
It does a bit. Yes, it does a bit. But it's quite nice to have something at the side of the bed and just read a bit each night. And another name that came up I think it might have been on the socials somewhere, was Denise Levertov. And I thought, another name that I know, but I haven't read any Denise Levertov. So I got hold of her new selected poems published by Blood Axe, and so I'm reading my way through that. It's interesting, though, these selecteds and collecteds, of course, they're always in chronological order, aren't they? So you start, and I find the early stuff is what I read first. And then by the time you get to the end, you realise that the poet's style has changed incredibly.
Yeah, I like seeing that development.
Yeah, it is. So the beginning of this book, her early work, and I was thinking, I loved it. I really sort of was finding it really fascinating. But as I went through the book, I was feeling a little more kind of wondering what was going on. I felt a bit challenged by the later work. But there, I'm dipping into Denise. Two other ones I'll just mention that I'll probably talk about in another poddy in more depth. Another new and selected, and this is by Kwame Dawes, a Ghanaian poet who, again, don't know his work, but actually I'm really enjoying it. It's powerful stuff. And finally, something a bit more contemporary from Live Canon, Glynn Maxwell's book, The Big Calls.
Oh, okay.
Don't know if have you seen that? Have you come across that?
I've heard good things.
Yeah, me too. So I thought I'd pick that up and have a look. I haven't got terribly far, but he's addressing a lot of contemporary issues, particularly pandemic and Brexit and Grenfell and the issues of the last 10 years, shall we say. But he's presenting them in the style of famous, iconic poems of the past.
Oh, okay.
So
like pastiches.
So, yes. It's terribly clever, very skillful. But I'm not sure that I want to read a pastiche of Tennyson's In Memoriam when it's all about Boris Johnson, or all about the pandemic. It kind of gives me a bad feeling. It gives a sad feeling. And yet it's very clever.
Perhaps it's suggesting that the roots of our current malaises lie in those embedded attitudes of patriarchal Victorian poets.
Yes, you're absolutely. And we've got Rudyard Kipling's If. Indeed, it is all of those things. I'm really only giving a superficial first thought on it, having not read all the poems in the book. The blurb on the front calls it a work of both tradition and sedition. So definitely worth a look. Those are the highlights of what I've been browsing and perusing in my ample spare time when we've not been poddying. But how about yourself, Peter? Do tell us.
Well, mainly I stayed in sunny Seaford. It's quite weird to live in a place where 1 in 10 planes that fly over Seaford is actually a Spitfire, a genuine Spitfire, because there's some kind of a business that flies a Spitfire and often has a light aircraft going alongside it full of people taking photographs of the Spitfire.
Yeah, I think we've seen that over Eastbourne, but clearly Seaford is more of a sort of hot spot.
Well, it flies over the Seven Sisters, I think, and does a bit of sort of swooping about and then goes back home. I'm still at that stage where it's just like, smack my forehead and say, look, a Spitfire. So apart from, so we've been growing things like in a frenzy. We suddenly become farmers, and Lorraine's been growing everything from padron peppers to aubergines and tomatoes and things.
Fantastic.
So we've been eating like kings. And we went up to the East Nuke of Fife, counterintuitively heading north for our summer holidays, just for about four days, to see Lorraine's son and Sam and Jade, his wife. And Jade's a lecturer at St Andrews now in the philosophy department. So she took us in the summer to slip into the philosophy department, and there's a kind of academics reading room there. All those philosophical books reminded me of being a student again. But there's a weird smell. Maybe it's just the smell of philosophy books is kind of, it was really odd. So it was kind of comforting and yet terrifying at the same time. I encountered a book by the South Korean writer called Kang, translated into a fabulous lyrical English by Deborah Smith. And it's just, it just knocked me off my feet. I can't remember the last time I read a book that I thought was so good. It's so poetic, everything about the spirit of it is poetry, and yet it's a prose thing, but, the prose is beautiful. Mainly it's a sort of meditation on white things, because it's called The White Book. But, a lot of that is snow, and the eye of the book is finding herself living in this Polish city, which seems to be snowy most of the time. But she's also brooding about death and rebirth and so on. And it's in lots of small sections, so you can just devour it sort of mouthful by mouthful. I just can't tell you how much I loved it. Best book I've read for a long time.
Golly.
So I highly recommend that.
Excellent.
I've been wild about paleoanthropology and kind of early man, and I've been reading loads of things about that in the last few years. But there's a new book called The Naked Neanderthal by Ludovic Slimak, who's a French academic who spends all his summers excavating Neanderthal caves. And his main point is that the problem with everyone thinking about Neanderthals is they either denigrate Neanderthals as being these knuckle draggers, or they try and see Homo sapiens, they try and find us in the lives of these Neanderthals. So they keep looking for human-type art.
Yeah.
And, kind of Homo sapiens-y type things. But he thinks that they had less of a sense of ego than Homo sapiens. But they were very intelligent and extremely creative. And his evidence for that is that Homo sapiens, when they started making axes and things, kind of mass manufactured the things that looked exactly the same, whereas Neanderthals kind of took each object as a fresh project and did it differently. There's more variation. There's not that kind of idea of industrialization or whatever. Perhaps this is all a bit questionable, but yeah, very fascinating. And
that is fascinating, and that's a very good point, isn't it? That we are in a mass production, an age of mass production and mass thinking, and certainly in the Western world. You know, we've been through this so-called age of enlightenment, and there is such a thing as reason and reasonable behaviour. And have we restricted our way of thinking and looking at the world? And I don't know. I do think about these things. I've never read about anything about Neanderthal man, but certainly trying to write a story at the moment set in the 14th century England. Part of me is saying, these are people just like me, you know, humans 600 years, 800 years ago, you know, they can't have been that much different, what they thought, how they felt, how they reacted to their world. And yet, well, who's to say things weren't completely different, how people thought about everything, how they thought about family, work, relationships, the world, the community, what they did, you know, the art that they made, because our minds must have been moulded over the centuries. We must be different now in many ways. Yeah. And it's hard to think, well, in what way? You know, in what ways were we different?
He's saying that Neanderthals actually thought very differently to the way Homo sapiens think. And actually, if we're looking for aliens out in space, you know, the real aliens were the Neanderthals, you know, who were kind of like us, but thought very differently. And in terms of my own writing, I've been kind of writing quite well and steadily, and I've been working on a collection, and I find myself replacing weaker poems with newer poems and drawing it all together. But it's just so slow. But as part of my research in that, because the book's about memory and the unreliability of memory, I made some efforts to trace my real father, who I'd not seen since I was 6, partly as a kind of experiment to check, you know, my memories about things and how reliable or unreliable they were. But I discovered that he died in 2017. But I found a photograph of him online, and it's a very weird thing to see. You know, it made me feel quite strange looking at this guy that looked like me that I hadn't seen for something like, you know, 58 years.
Yeah, almost like looking at an ancestor or something.
Yeah, well, literally looking at my father, but, you know, I couldn't remember what he looked like or anything. And then discovering at the same time that he was dead, it was quite, you know, it wasn't upsetting, but I definitely felt some kind of subterranean shift in my psyche somehow. So, yeah, a lot of the summer holiday, to sum up, oh God, was quite introspective and kind of, you know, working on things and reading and stuff. But
yeah, I didn't, writing-wise, I've been carrying on writing this novel that I'm working on. I haven't written a lot of new poetry, I must admit, but I did finally. The backlog of submissions finally cleared with a great sort of plunger of grief. Like a year, stuff I'd sent out to magazines over a year ago finally came through with a great big no thank you. In fact, it had been so long I'd forgotten what I'd even sent. So in a way that makes it it's not a big thing. It's just more like, oh, thank goodness that blockage has finally gone through. Another project I've been working on, and I'm really pleased it's just coming to fruition, is my writing group in Hastings, the Hastings Poetry Stanza, have produced an anthology, and it's pretty good. I think we've done a great job on it, though I say so myself, and we're launching it later this month. But it's
that the royal we, or who are you doing it with?
Yeah. Well, it's my co-members of the Stanza. So we meet once a month to workshop our poems, and so we thought it'd be good to put together some of our work. And we know we're not the first group to do such a thing, but it is a satisfying project. Yeah, I enjoyed working on that.
There's something about just getting a project done and then having it out and finished.
Launching it.
Yeah. It's weird. October seems to be the the time to launch things, doesn't it? And we're both born in October, therefore October is, the time for great poetry.
It's definitely a great month. A great month.